There's one constant on Miami's sideline. It's head coach Erik Spoelstra. But as the Heat front office tries to improve the roster, what's the ideal team that Spo would want to work with? And where does this current version fall short? We'll answer that on today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day. And for daily content on the Heat, click that subscribe button on YouTube. Make sure you're following us on your favorite podcast app. Have a fun show for you today. I'm really pumped up for this one. We're talking about what Erik Spoelstra's preferred team would be if he could play any style, have any kind of players. We'll talk about where last season's team fell short and then build the team Spo would most want to coach. But before we do that, we should look back on some of Spo's most successful teams. Two come to mind right away, David. The Big Three Heat and then the 2022 Heat that finished with the number one seed in the East. And I know I'm kind of putting all those Big Three teams together, but they were essentially playing the same way for 4 straight years. Before I get into some of the stats or anything else, do you agree that those are the two teams?
Yeah, I actually gave some consideration to not just those two groups specifically, but also to the, and I know this might sound insane, but the 2016-17 team, because going 41-41, starting out the season 11-30, and then having a subpar roster, maybe that's not ideal in terms of that. But in terms of how Spo would measure success, even though they fell short of the playoffs, the fact that they were able to rebound as well as they did and to have that kind of a massive turnaround, a historically great turnaround, and the exact opposite record from one half of the season to the other, I think allows Spo to really kind of just imprint it. Like when you're 11-30, what else do you have to lose? And that's where Spo is at his most insane and most genius, and where he can just go, all right, I don't care anymore. We've already lost 30 games. We're not really playing for anything but our own pride at this point. And that's where he really just digs in and can just take out every tool in the toolbox and do his best work. So I gave that a little consideration. And then similarly, I kind of applied that same theory to the 2019-20 season because of the Orlando bubble and all the challenges it presented, which again, that's Spo at his greatest, because it's like, okay, 0 distractions, no family, living in the midst of this Disney resort as there's this chaos all around it. Awesome. Who else would love that more than Erik Spoelstra? Like that is the insanity at work there that he embraces so completely. So I don't know if it qualifies as the most successful season, but probably the most aligned in terms of temperament and the mentality that Spo possesses and his view for what a basketball should be played and how it should be played.
So the 11-30 team, post All-Star break, they were 6th in offensive rating and 6th in defensive rating during the 2016-17 season. They were just awesome, okay? And they were
incredible. Yeah,
they were really good. There's a difference between the best teams that Erik Spoelstra had and the most successful teams Erik Spoelstra had. And I love that 2016-17 team. You and I hold that team very close to our hearts. They are by no stretch any of Erik Spoelstra's best basketball teams. And even the 2023 finals run, I thought about that in the 2020, the bubble.
Yep.
The bubble could be one of the best teams. After the trade deadline, adding Jay Crowder, Andre Iguodala, that was a complete full team of vets ready to win and win in that moment. It was really hard to kind of parse through the stats and some of the other things with that just because of the COVID interruption and the bubble and all of that stuff. But it's all worth considering. But when I think about the best teams that Erik Spoelstra ever had, consistently from the beginning of the season to the end of the season, I think about the Big Three, specifically the 2012-2013 year when they won 66 games.
Yep.
And then the 2022 season. They were the number one seed in the Eastern Conference that year. So I dove into some of the stats and I'll breeze through some of them really quick. So that Big Three season, the 2012-2013 season, they won 66 games. They were 1st in offensive rating, 9th in defensive rating. You wouldn't usually assume or characterize an Erik Spoelstra Miami Heat team as better on offense than they were defense. But that's what that big three Heat team was. They were still very good defensively, and as we remember in the playoffs, were able to kind of kick it up a notch in the postseason defensively. But they were good enough to win 66 games in the regular season, and they just blew the doors off opponents with the best offense in the league.
27 game win streak.
Yeah.
I remember not covering that season because neither of us were in media at that point, but just watching it as a fan in that perspective and thinking they don't always have to play 48 minutes of great defense, but when they did, there was no team that was going to find a way to score on that group. As good as they were with LeBron at his peak, Chris at his peak, Dwayne not quite at his peak, but still damn good. Those were some amazing teams, and the supporting cast around those three were as good a supporting cast as you have throughout the history of NBA basketball, and they were just so capable. That's the first time I ever saw a team, I think, to me, be able to flip the switch because they were that good. Like they could just cruise for 47 minutes, but that 1 minute they were going to find a way to crush your soul, and that was just what they were capable of. And we saw it many times during that win streak where they were down, and then all of a sudden we're like, no, we're not going to lose this game because
there was a game in Cleveland, that they were down
27.
20, they were down 20 in the fourth quarter, and then they were just like, let's go win this game. I remember I was I was in college, and I was leaving. I was working at the student union at UCF, and I was like trying to get off my shift as soon as I could, and I made like the very end of that fourth quarter. I was like, wait, we're down what? Oh, this is the losing streak's gonna the winning streak's gonna come to an end and all this stuff, and then they flipped that switch. That was a great year. Obviously, the talent speaks for itself, but in terms of the style of play, I think it's worth diving into some of that stuff too. They were not a great rebounding team. We remember that. They kept turnovers low though, so they weren't giving away possessions, and they were generating steals, and they were generating points off of turnovers. They were third in steals, third in points off of turnovers that season. They blitzed a ton on defense. Remember Chris Bosh at the 5, trap and show on pick and rolls, always sending 2 to the ball, flying death machine, all of that stuff, right? Let's generate steals. Let's get out in the open court, and we're going to overwhelm you that way. That's what they did defensively. There was no tracking data on the NBA website for that year, but I did go find 2013-14 tracking data. That's as far back as it goes. That team, again, very similar to the previous team, that team was 5th in drives per game. Found that interesting. And that 2012-2013 team was 3rd in three-pointers made per possession. So a very elite three-point shooting team. Ray Allen, Shane Battier, all those guys were making threes. The 2022 team, breezing through the stats here, 12th in offensive rating, 4th in defensive rating. So flipped a little bit, right? Elite defensively, good enough offensively. That big three team, not great at rebounding. That 2022 team, top 10 in rebounding percentage, both offensive and defensive rebounding percentage. That was a very good rebounding team. Similarly to the big three team, they did generate steals. They were 11th in steals per 100 possessions, and they were 7th in points off of turnovers generated. They didn't blitz on defense, but they did switch everything on defense. Bam Adebayo, PJ Tucker, Jimmy Butler, Kyle Lowry. Those guys were able to switch everything. So they switched everything on defense. They didn't drive a ton because they didn't have that guy. They didn't have a LeBron or a Dwayne Wade, but they were 5th in paint touches. Jimmy Butler getting the ball in the paint on entry passes. Bam Adebayo, that was the year where he started to get in the paint more, and they kind of got away from that perimeter-oriented dribble handoff stuff, got him going in the low block. And then similarly, though, to the big three team, 4th in three-pointers made per possession. So when you look at the similarities between the big three and the 2022 teams, they were slow in pace. Both teams were near the bottom of the league in pace, so methodical. They generated and scored off of turnovers, and they got up a lot and made a lot of three-pointers. If I were going to try to distill the similarities down, those are the things I would come up with. What about you?
No, I think that's it. Even hearing you describe those similarities, one thing that stands out to me, and I think it's where both of us covering that team and hearing Spo talk about these things regularly, it was intent. That's the word that starts out. Like they're both, and hearing the comparison between the big three era and this, not just having a certain amount of talent, that's a prerequisite, but playing with such intent and purpose and an understanding of what you're trying to do, and then having the capacity to do so. Because as much as you could say this team, this current iteration, might have that intent, and I'm sure we'll argue that in the next segment. They're just not talented enough to actually implement Spo's vision and his preferred style of play. But that's interesting. You start to see a lot of similarities when you boil down the stats between the two groups, even though, again, you would not equate a historically good team in the big three versus what we saw in 22. And yet there are similarities in terms of what Spo likes and how both those teams, as different as they were in terms of composition, are able to make his vision a reality. And that's basically what this is about. And I wanted to get into this a second, just for those listeners that aren't aware. We talked about the lessons that we could learn as far as the Heat front office from the Indiana Pacers, because you could argue that they've been just as good as any team in the last couple of seasons because they've made it to 2 straight Eastern Conference finals and they have this incredible talent there. They might be going in the finals run for the first time ever. And so given that, we talked about the fact that they built a team for Rick Carlisle, one of the best coaches in NBA history, and this is a team that plays the style that he does. I don't think Erik Spoelstra has had that, not since 2022. And even going back before that, not since the Big Three era. And so that's basically the premise for the show is how can they build a team where Spo feels like he's at his best and is able to make his vision manifest out into the court. And that's why I think it's so important, because Spo's not going anywhere. For all those of you who might criticize what he has, and I think some of it is deserved, he's not going anywhere. And so the best way of getting the best product on the floor is to have a team that fits into what Spo wants to do on the court. And that's what this episode is all about.
Well said. And that team this past year did fall short. We'll talk about exactly where they fell short, and then we're going to build out Erik Spoelstra's dream team after this here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Skims. When I found out Skims was making underwear for men, well, I was intrigued. I've heard so much about their quality from friends and family, and I just had to give it a try. And let me tell you, it lives up to the hype. You know, you always have issues with underwear, whether it's fit or comfort, or maybe just finding the right style. But Skims has changed all that for me because their men's line offers something for everyone, from boxer briefs to classic briefs, all designed with a perfect balance of comfort and style. I tried the Skims boxer briefs, and let me tell you, I'm hooked. They're perfect for my lifestyle. They move with me. They never lose their shape. They stay in place all day. Whatever I'm doing, whether I'm working out, running errands, playing with my son, it's all the best fit I could have. They're so reliable. They're the best underwear I've ever had. Plus, the lightweight material feels amazing, almost like you're wearing nothing at all. So shop Skims Men at skims.com/LockedOnNBA at Skims stores. Let them know we sent you. After you place your order, you can select podcast in the survey and select our show in the drop-down menu that follows. Skims is the official underwear partner of the NBA, WNBA, and USA Basketball. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Let's talk about this past season and where this version of the Heat fell short of the version that Erik Spoelstra wants to play. And really quick, to talk about a little bit more, to touch on what you were talking about with Erik Spoelstra.
Yeah.
Coaches want to play a certain way. And I think the pushback on what you just said would be, well, if the roster doesn't work that way, then it's up to Spo to figure out, to ditch the way he wants to play and just figure out a way that works.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly what Erik Spoelstra has done. I think it's a borderline miracle that team even made the playoffs last year. I know they had to win 2 straight games in the play-in tournament. He figured it out. And yes, they got wiped off the floor by the Cavs. You want to know why? Because the Cavs have way more talent than the Heat. There's only a certain amount of coaching. Coaching can only take you so far in the NBA. You need the talent. But I think Spoelstra has been playing a way he doesn't want to play for years. And I think his critics will say that he's stubborn, and I would say he's absolutely not. He wants to switch defensively. This team hasn't switched defensively in 2 or 3 years because they don't have the personnel.
Exactly.
He doesn't want to play zone. They have to because they don't have the personnel to play any other way consistently. There's just certain things that he can't do that I think he would like to do. And then at the same time, he's had to lean into different things. He didn't want to play Caleb Martin at the 4. He had to.
Right.
Because the front office never didn't give him power forward when PJ Tucker left. So I think Erik Spoelstra has been extremely flexible and versatile and hasn't played the way he's wanted to play in a long time. Since basically 2022. I don't think he's had a team that has been able to execute at his vision since the 2022 team. And the only exception would be that brief run during the playoffs in 2023 where they made every three-pointer that they took.
Yeah, and a lot of that was, Jimmy playing at the highest level he possibly could, and then finding guys in Gabe Vincent and Max Strus that were playing at such a high variance with their three-point shooting. I mean, they were shooting historically well. You're not going to find that. And we saw what happened with the Cavs, shooting historically well against the Heat. Is that an indictment of Miami? Perhaps. And then what happens when they face Indiana? Not quite as prolific from beyond the line. So, I mean, that's basically it. And I think if anything, the fact that he got as much success out of this group kind of underscores just how fantastic a coach he is, that he is able to mold his team and kind of adjust to it and go, okay, this is what we actually have. And at the same time, understand that you can try and carve out some level of success. The fact that this team made the playoffs was, as you said, a minor miracle. And so I think it really shows the capacity for Spo to be a fantastic, great, and kind of flexible coach in terms of his style. But imagine wanting to drive a sports car your whole life, and just this is how you train, this is what you want, and you kind of know the ins and outs of every sports car and what you're going to do, and you've gone out on the track and you're perfecting it and everything else like that. And then Pat Riley gives you the keys to a mom bus or something like that, a small minivan or something. That's basically what this was. And he's like, okay, I can work with this, but he has to adjust on the fly. It's never going to be the same. It's not the kind of team he wants.
And remember, he wanted to play 5 out. That was the experiment. Yeah. Terry Rozier, Tyler Hero, Jimmy Butler, Nikola Jovic, and Bam was the initial starting 5. And he thought, okay, we saw the Celtics win the championship, and we've got to do something like what they do, and we got to get up more threes. Maybe it's not going to be 53 pointers a game, but we got to get more. We got to get up more and take more. Which he's never really been. I guess the closest thing to 5 out would have been the big 3 Heat, but that was more inverted. That was more LeBron in the post, Dwayne Wade driving and kicking, Chris Bosh at that center spot, stretching the defense. I would not have considered that team 5 out. Nobody was really 5 out back then. But
pace and space.
It was the closest pace and space, right? And it was the closest thing probably to 5 out at the time that we had, and it kind of led to the Warriors after that, and then the Celtics last year, and kind of where this league has gone. And he tried to do that version of it this year, and he just didn't have the personnel. And whatever happened to Terry Rozier, was dramatically impacting that too. Let's look at some of the stats, though. They finished the year 21st in offensive rating, 9th in defensive rating. So offensively, obviously fell short. Defensively, top 10 in defense. That's where you expect the Heat to be at minimum. They were 11th in three-pointers made per possession. That was higher than I thought.
Yeah.
But a lot of that was probably Tyler Hero just having an out-of-body experience from 3 for 3/4 of the season. And then
Bam having an above-average year of production for the center position or power forward position. Like that's I think that's a huge factor too.
Yep, and it's worth keeping in mind for where this thing is going. Yes, in terms of the things that Erik Spoelstra wants to accomplish, yes, they did keep turnovers low. Miami Heat teams tend to do that. They did not generate the turnovers, though. That was another thing that we heard in preseason. Erik Spoelstra talking about how we want to generate steals and get those steal and score type of opportunities. Defense fuels offense. All these things didn't happen. They finished the year 15th in steals per game, so average. They were 22nd in the league in points off of turnovers. They generated 16.4 points off of turnovers. Their opponents did not get a lot of turnovers or points off of turnovers. They also generated 16.4. So they basically broke even. Everything they got off of turnovers, they gave away, and vice versa. So when you look at the similarities in terms of the most successful Heat teams, generate and score off of turnovers, get up and make threes. The Heat did get up and make threes, but they did not. But I wouldn't say at an elite level like those teams did, but at an okay level and an acceptable level even, I think is fine. But they did not generate and score off of turnovers, which I think if there's anything in the Erik Spoelstra DNA, if I were to try to describe an Erik Spoelstra basketball team the way he would want to play, To me, it would start with generating and scoring off of turnovers, and specifically steals, right? Being disruptive. We hear him use that word all the time. Being disruptive, grabbing the ball and scoring at the other end. That, to me, I think is the essential DNA of an Erik Spoelstra GM team.
Yeah. In terms of the defensive mindset and the fact that it leads to offense almost feels like an added bonus, but I don't think it's a prerequisite to get the scoring. They want to be able to invite chaos on the defensive end, because if you can't score and you can't find a score because for whatever reason the shots aren't falling or the ball's not falling through or whatever, because that happens even to great scoring teams, you can at least rely on your defense. If it's that good and playing at such an elite level that you can force those turnovers, you're going to be able to find a winning game. Like we've talked about it before, those games in the mud that you saw so often over the last 5.5 seasons with Jimmy Butler there, he didn't prefer that, but you can win those games, and they did win a lot of those games because of that defensive intensity, the fact that they could kind of just take over in some moments and be able to find a way to shut the opposing team down, even when they couldn't generate offense worth a damn. If you can play defense at a high level, you still give yourself a chance to win.
Two more things, or one more thing really that jumps out. This Heat team did not have an offensive identity. That big three team, we talked about how you inverted it. LeBron, Dwayne Wade, they drove, got into the paint, kicked out to Ray Allen, Shane Battier, Mario Chalmers, Chris Bosh, whoever it was. We knew that that's how that team wanted to play. They had a clear identity and a clear plan that they wanted to execute offensively. The 2022 Heat team, same thing. We knew exactly what they wanted to do. Generate post touches, get into the paint, kick out to PJ Tucker in the corner, kick out to Kyle Lowry, kick out to Max Strus, kick out to Duncan Robinson, Tyler Hero, whoever it was. We knew what that team wanted to do. And then added layer for that 2022 team, then they had Tyler Hero coming off the bench doing his sixth man of the year thing, and that helped offensively too. That was a very clear, okay, let Tyler cook. That's what we're going to do when Jimmy Butler's off the floor. So those teams had a clear thing that they wanted to do offensively, and I just thought that this last year, we talked about this all year long, it's what exactly is the plan? In crunch time, where does this team go? And it never really felt like they had figured it out because they had the injuries and the Jimmy Butler thing and all this stuff. They were getting pulled in so many different directions throughout the season. So with all of that said, it's time to build out Erik Spoelstra's dream team. We'll talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by CarGurus. Shopping for a car should be exciting, not exhausting. But between the confusing prices and the hidden fees, well, it can all feel very overwhelming. But that's why you should try using CarGurus. They help you cut through the noise and show you the best deals with full confidence. With over 4 million listings, CarGurus has more new and used cars than any other major online marketplace in the U.S. They verify dealers, provide real price analysis, and give you the tools and data that you need to make the right choice without second guessing yourself. If you need a deal you can trust, well, CarGurus makes it easy to compare vehicles side by side with unbiased deal ratings. One of their best features, well, their price drop alert, so you know exactly what the perfect car is and when it's available for your budget. So if you it's no wonder that similar web estimated traffic data shows CarGurus is the #1 most visited car shopping site. So buy or sell your next car today with CarGurus at CarGurus.com. Go to CarGurus.com to make sure your big deal is the best deal. That's CarGurus.com. CarGurus.com. We'll be right back.
All right, so let's build out Erik Spoelstra's dream team here. Where do we start? Is it the DNA that I was talking about? Generate steals, score off of turnovers. Would you agree with that?
I think that's part of it. I even wanted to take it just a step back further because I know that there's a type of team, and I think that 22 group is almost the perfect representation of that. And get even to the Big Three era. I wrote this down here, like mostly veterans, like 90% of the roster has to be a very veteran roster with some young competitive players. And you think back to 2022, like Bam, very young at that point, but more of a veteran in terms of his mental approach and still experience at that point being on the floor. But Hero and guys like that, they were just still trying to cut their teeth in this league.
And
Martin,
that's
what
Gabe
he's looking
Vincent,
for.
Max Strus,
yeah,
like those guys.
But then
too.
you had Andre Iguodala, you had
bubble,
Jay Crowder, guys that had been around, Jimmy, Goran. It was not Goran because Kyle was there at that point in time, but you had a good mix there of all these different versions. I'm sorry, not Kyle, PJ Tucker. You had so many other veterans there, and it's what you want. You want that group that has that. And honestly, I think you always the UD type. I think it's so essential for a guy like Spo, as well as he connects with players, and I think that's pretty undisputed. I think he still wants a guy that is basically a liaison between the team and him. And I don't think Caleb is that guy. I think he has shades of that, but not to the same extent. He's not such a company man as UD was.
Bam's that guy.
Yeah.
Bam's that guy. And it's a little bit different than Haslam because you don't have a guy just sitting at the end of the bench doing it. Kevin Love is important in a different way. I think he's really important to that locker room, but he's not. I think it's a great word that you use, the liaison, but that's Bam. And I think the veteran is a great call. And I think the next version of an elite Heat team will probably be a combination of the 2022 team. Actually, the group that we've seen in the Jimmy Butler era, where the development program was a cornerstone for their success. That was not the case during the Big 3 years, right? If there was a critique of the Big 3 team, it was that they didn't develop anybody. Yeah. Right? And they needed the Shane Battiers and the Mike Millers and the Ray Allens and the Rashard Lewises and all these guys to come in and help, the Chris Andersons. They constantly were sifting through veterans to find some that could help the team, and they nailed a bunch of them, and that's why they went to 4 straight finals. But they never really developed anybody. And whatever the next elite Heat era is, it'll probably be a combination of veteran talent at the top. Development program is what's churning the middle and the end of the roster, and that's how they're developing that sustainability, I suppose. But I think Bam is essential. I think that's why Erik Spoelstra loves Bam. When you're talking about what they want to do defensively, generating steals, switching everything, I think that Erik Spoelstra would love to switch defensively, but I really think that he would also want to be multiple. Right? He would want to go man when he has to. He would want to play drop when he has to. He would want to go to zone when he has to. But in terms of a base scheme, I think first possession of every game he'd like to be switching.
I agree.
That's what makes Bam essential. And by the way, there's different versions of switching too. Like Kel'el Ware could be a part of this, where you 1-5 you drop everything, where Ware's always dropping, but you're switching 1 through 4. That still to me counts.
I think that's really important to take into consideration, is that he does want that versatility, and maybe that feels like an oversimplification, but I don't think so. Like, a lot of coaches will just stick to their guns. This is what I do best, and I'm just going to roll it out there. It doesn't always work. Sometimes it does, or you can have a lot of regular season success and then not have postseason success because you're so focused on what you do well. Whereas with Spo, I think he does want the ability to morph from time to time to different base defenses, but the personnel has to be capable of that. And I think that's the concern with this group, is that they don't have it, with the exception of Bam. But as you said, that's why he's so valued by the front office and the coaching staff.
Then you look at, I think Jimmy Butler was exactly what he was looking for defensively, a guy who just generated, at his peak, 2 steals per game. And was able to just take the ball and score on the other end. Didn't need anybody else. One-man wrecking crew. And this team doesn't really have that. Nope. Davion Mitchell is probably the closest thing to that. And he's only been here for like 2 minutes. It's why I think he's going to be a priority. I think they are going to try to re-sign him no matter what. But restricted free agency, you never know what's going to happen. But even a guy like Andrew Wiggins doesn't really fit. He's more of a solid defender who's going to stay in front of you, but he's not going to knock the ball away and generate turnovers necessarily. He can play in transition, but he's not going to be really initiating those transition buckets. And I think that's more of what you're looking for. And I think that's a subtle but important difference. I think he would love to be able to switch and have Bam generate more of those looks too. But because of how Bam has to play and drop the last couple of years, it's been harder. And that, by the way, was one of those things when he moved to power forward. He was able to kind of do that a little bit more towards the end of the season. I think he'd want personnel on the perimeter. I think he really would love to have. I mean, obviously, everybody would love to have like a peak Kawhi kind of player, like a Dyson Daniels, like a Lou Dort, like these guys who are fully disruptive, and OG Anunoby, these guys who just poke the ball away and just flip games on their head with defensive plays on the perimeter. He doesn't really have that right now under contract.
We've heard him say that, like that term, that what we want is disruptors on defense. And I wrote down, I forgot the term, but hearing you say disruptive, I'm reminded of how many times he's brought it up to us in press conference. And to me, I wrote creating chaos, basically the same thing.
Yeah.
You just want somebody who's just a living monkey wrench out there who can go out there and just cause panic, because you throw everything off that an opposing team is trying to do when they have that kind of level of disruptive ability. And I think that's so essential for what Spo loves, because that introduces doubt and fear in what you do best, because you have somebody like that. And that's how they were able to have that kind of success. To me, for all his other warts, he was masterful at it. He was, and I'm so happy to hear it. I think it was UD mentioned this lately, that as talented as guys like D Wade and LeBron were, what separated Jimmy was his high IQ. He was a smart basketball player in how he approached the game. And I mean, he was really, really skilled and knowing exactly what a game required and when to make that flip switch internally, individually. And then everybody else kind of fed off of that. And that led to a lot of success over those 5 seasons with him.
So that's defensively what we're talking about. Offensively, I think it's pretty simple. I think it's what he wants to do. I think he wants, I have written down, get into the paint. Drives, post-ups. I don't think he cares, but just somebody who gets into the paint. But I'll go even one step further on that. Somebody who makes the defense crash. Like, let's just say it for what it is, right? And so whether that's a post player who forces double and triple teams, like Nikola Jokic, you know, or Giannis, guys like that who just force defenders into the paint, make you build a wall, make you commit deep into the paint. Or somebody who drives and just forces the defense to pinch or help or overhelp or rotate or whatever. However it's done, he wants multiple defenders to be forced to come into the paint, and then he wants that the player who's making them do that be able to do 2 things. A, score anyway. LeBron James, right? Dwayne Wade. Yep. Jimmy Butler at his peak. And B, kick out to open shooters, and then you get the 3-point shooting. That is essential for an Erik Spoelstra team.
Yeah, agreed. The things I was focusing on were ball movement too, and also almost like the same kind of idea of what he wants defensively. He'd like that same level of versatility offensively, because it's just, I know, again, it sounds like an oversimplification, but it's so important for him to have bigs that can drive and pass.
Multiple dribble drive guys. Yeah. And going back to the 41 and 41 team, right? What unlocked that group was Dragic and Waiters kind of tag teaming that dribble drive attack. I think you're right. He wants everybody to be able to handle the ball a little bit and be able to do it on their own also.
A lot of ball movement too, passing.
Off-ball movement also, right? Yep. Cutting, baseline cuts, all that stuff.
Yeah.
All right. So that's the team that Erik Spoelstra wants to coach. I think we figured it out. If we're building the team that Spo wants to coach, disruptive on defense, gets into the paint, generates open threes. That's the team. Last question before we get out of here. If Erik Spoelstra can kick any coach off the bench and take over coaching that team from this past season, which team do you think Spo would most want to coach? And there's a very obvious team in my mind, I think. It's very clear.
That's a great question. I don't know that I've given it
who's the team when Spo is watching League Pass, he's like, man, if you just gave me this team, I would love coaching this team.
I don't know.
Can I tell you?
I can't think of it.
It's the Thunder, isn't it?
Is it?
Yeah.
I guess you're right. Yeah, the style, the defensive tenacity for
100% the Thunder.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good call. And you've got that guy in Shea who can just attack, and then you've got enough shooting around to find that balance. It does. They've got a lot of it. And we've heard Dagon talk. Yeah.
Could you imagine
talk about Miami? He's almost like a de facto member of the Spo coaching tree, because the way he talks about Spo and the Heat, it's like, that's what we're trying to build here. We're trying to build a culture. These guys have already had it for years. Yeah, Dagnall. Yeah, he's had it for such a long time. The way he talks about Miami is what he's been able to develop in Oklahoma City. And so, yeah, you're absolutely right. That is the team for Spo.
the joy he would have just watching what Alex Caruso did to Jokic
Oh
the
man.
other night in that game 7. Could you imagine the post-game press conference with Eric? He'd be gushing. His head might explode.
One tear rolling down.
He would cry. He would literally cry tears of joy. Give Erik Spoelstra something to work with. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts.